Okay, so welcome to lesson one of our 10 weeks leading up to Christmas and everything. This term, a few people mentioned that it'd be really nice to focus on birds. So we're going to be looking at birds and doing some drawing and mark making first to begin with today. So you may have been on the website, on the website and then onto the drive, where there's some worksheets that you could print off. If you couldn't do it, it doesn't mean that you can't do the exercises that we've got set today. And actually, I can put some of the worksheet on the screen while we're working as well. But you will need a picture of a bird. So I can also put one of those on screen too, but otherwise you could get one on your phone or something and use that. But we'll see how we get on, and I'll ask everyone how they're getting on in a bit as well. Oh, there's Linda trying to get in again. Let's see if she can get in now. Right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about what we're doing, but generally we're going to start with mark making using pencils. So the idea of the mark making is to capture some of the textures and in the feathers, capture some of the marks on the side, on the feathers themselves, and really just to experiment with the layering lots of different techniques on top of each other, and just exploring what could happen. So images the drawings you do don't necessarily have to look completely realistic. It's more about creating a sense of energy and character within the drawings that you're doing. All right, so we'll go over to the wall. So over here then, so I've already put the worksheet on here. So and then I've also put a few pictures of owls. So do you know what? I think I didn't do this on purpose, but I think this is the owl that is actually on the worksheet, just there. And over here, I couldn't resist this little fella because he looks a bit shocked and dismayed to be photographed. So I put him on as well because he's pretty awesome. I quite like owls actually. So this is the sort of image we're working from. I'll try and put that on the screen as you're working so you can get some more ideas, but there's loads of pictures of these sorts of things on the internet, if you want to have another look at those. So zooming right in here, this is the owl you're going to literally be working over the top of. So up here, look, we've got, or around the whole thing, we've got different drawing techniques that you can try directly over the top of this pale looking owl. So basically I've just faded him out a bit so that you could see the outlines, but add in your own techniques. So part of the inspiration for this was an artist called Thomas Berwick, who was a really, I'll just get rid of that owl for a minute. There you go. So Thomas Berwick was one of the first artists to really start exploring nature, and there was a bit of a trend in around the 1750s or something around there, probably the late 1700s, where people were starting to be a bit more interested in nature. And so artists like Thomas Berwick led the way in sort of illustrating artists, but using printmaking skills. So some of the techniques we're looking at, like these ones up here, sort of show themselves in some of his etchings that he did. So you can see, for example, we've got these strokes on the close detail of the woodpecker. I'll come right into that there. So you can see, look, there's the strokes coming across, which are over here on the wing, and then we've got these darker marks and so forth. And then on the bark of the tree of this owl, Thomas Berwick owl, we've got all these different marks which are really wonderful to show the texture and the bumpiness of the bark of the wood. So we're going to experiment really and just have a bit of fun, layering techniques on top of each other to see what we can come out with for mark making. Okay, now the other thing you can do, don't forget that you can layer these techniques on top of each other, so they're not exclusive to themselves. In fact, when you start mixing different techniques together, you create even more interesting ideas. Okay. One of the things I talked about a bit this morning was looking out for, as well as lines, looking out for the shading. So on his eye here, look, you can see there's shadows just underneath the eyebrow, and underneath the beak, and underneath his chin, if he's got a chin. I don't know if owls have chins, but there you go. So you can shade back over the top of some of your marks to give the whole thing a little bit more depth. All right, so oh yes, and there was one other thing. There was a second sheet which is a picture of, a bit similar to the owl that we looked at a minute ago. There's another owl, and it's this one. So exactly the same idea with this owl as the last one, is to explore some techniques using line with your pencils today. Now, one of the things I love doing is working with biro. So I promise you we're going to be doing some biro next week, some biro drawing. So bring along a biro pen next week, and perhaps another picture of a bird that you'd like to play with or draw. Okay, right, so let's see if this works. Yes, we've got my screen on now, which is fantastic. So I just wanted to show you this book. So actually somebody gave me this book. It's by it's got loads of illustrations by Basil Ede, or Eda, or Edie. Okay, and it's just wonderful because it actually, some of the illustrations look quite similar in mark making to Thomas Berwick, who was just talking about, because there's lots of textures and mark making within these, but the compositions are absolutely wonderful as well. So you've got all these lovely bits of foliage and the birds sort of dotted around here as well. Let me just find one that's oh, here we go. So again, look, you've got the bark on the wood. I'll just zoom in a little bit because it's a bit difficult to see. There you go, that's better. So we've got interesting marks to show a bit of direction and movement within the pictures, as well as the mark making and things. Okay, so let's just have a nice nests and things like that too, birds in flight. So I thought, you know, we'd look at some of these ideas as well. Oh, and this is the another woodpecker over here, look, which is on the cover. I love all this sort of stuff that goes around here as well, and of course on the birds. Lovely bark and things on the wood as well. Now a lot of pictures I've actually put onto the website already. You'll see a lot of pictures a bit like this. So we've got more of these like woodpeckers, an interesting composition. So you could potentially, when you finish the first exercises, if you get that far, you could choose one of these illustrations from the net, from the website, from the shared drive, or I've also got there's lots of photographs. So depending on what you might have already chosen something, depending on what you've got, we'll be drawing from those as well next, and possibly going in with biro as well, which I'm going to be drawing from a little bit later. Now the other thing I'd like to try as well is watercolors and color pencils. You may remember some of these drawings if you're in the lockdown classes before. So this is watercolor around the outside of a pencil drawing with lots of layers of color on there. Now I thought I'd just bring these out again because I do these drawings and then they sort of stay in a folder somewhere. So I've also got this owl that I did before as well, and you can see on here how I've used mark making but with color. If I zoom in a bit there, so you can see there's lots of little lines and things that are built up together and layered on top of each other to create depth, but also interest, as in looking at the texture. And I called him Noddy before, Right, and then we've got this magpie drawing that I did previously. Now the last thing I'm going to show you before I do something here is one of those pictures by Basil Eade drawn with biro, and this is something I did a little while ago. See if I can just move the sketchbook a little bit. So again, this is sort of a continuation of what I've just been talking about with exploring mark making techniques. So in here we've got lots of cross hatching, we've got well, actually there's loads of cross hatching in this one, and I've added some of my own like leaves and things on the bottom. So this is what we'll be working towards next, and then possibly adding some watercolor to it, because if you're using a biro, they're quite good with watercolors because the ink of the biro doesn't tend to run very much, so it's quite a nice technique to use, as you know if you've been with me before. All right, so here is our lovely fluffy owl. So you need your pencil, and there's lots of techniques around here, as you can see. Just talked about a few minutes ago. So for example, we could start, and I often like to start with the eye. Is that in focus? Let's get that in focus. There you go. Right, so I often like to start with the eye because the eyes kind of bring pictures to life often. So we've got that in there, and then you can use little broken lines. So when you're doing things that you think might be an outline, it's quite nice to use dashes and perhaps even some dots, but to have broken lines in there. And then this technique up here is rhythmic, so, or what's called rhythmic. So lots of small dashes, maybe not perfectly aligned or anything like that. And one of the favorite ones that I like to show when I'm at school teaching is one of these. It's called directional. So this might show a more of a 3D quality and maybe suggest feathers as well. So that could be quite nice to do. And then, as I said, you could, if you wanted to, when you've done quite a bit, you might then say, right, I'm just going to add a little bit of tone as well as marks to start giving the picture some depth.
Jamie.
Yeah.
It's Linda.
Hello, Linda. I'm glad you could make it.
Well, we've had awful problems, but we found a way around things. Now, I've got limited things with me here in France.
Yeah.
And what I ended up doing, so I didn't understand that we actually needed the owl picture, plus the fact I couldn't have actually printed it off.
Yeah, that's all right. I understand.
I downloaded the picture of the jay.
Oh, brilliant. Yeah.
And
what, the one that I just
can I be
had?
naughty?
Yes, of course you can. Of course you can be naughty.
I was going to say, I'm using two iPads here.
Oh, yeah.
I've got Phil's iPad with the picture which I sent him at the J.
Yeah.
And I've got that open. Can I just attempt drawing that for the moment?
Yes. And that's what I just mentioned, is if you've had problems, I know one or two people have had problems printing off or getting hold of the images. So yes, that's perfectly acceptable, is to draw out a light outline of the bird that you've chosen. Even if it's just straight off the computer, that's absolutely fine. And then obviously you can start applying some of these ideas or techniques to it. You might, I don't know, but you might be able to download the sheet and look at that. But what I can do is, whilst we're all working here, I can put the sheet up here for you as well, with some close-ups of some of the techniques. Not quite like that, but yeah.
Yes, I mean, what I can try and do before next week is I'll print. I can do a photo shot of it on the iPad.
Oh yeah.
And then I can swap between the two.
Yeah.
I've got to think of devious means of doing it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I understand what you're saying.
I could be with you in 2 weeks' time.
All right. Okay. Right. Well, the next thing that I was just going to mention is over here. Look, you might have noticed this picture of a seagull here. I don't know if it's just called a black-headed seagull or anything, but you'll see how beautifully expressive these marks are on here. Look how they, oh, when it stops wobbling, you can see how they kind of move, and they've got this sense of movement. We're going to be doing some more drawings perhaps a bit like this, but on the second picture that was on those worksheet files, this is an idea that you might want to try as well. So obviously you can draw over this owl, as I mentioned before, but you can also use what I'd like you to do. The challenge is to try and make this bird look like he's flying through the air by using some, again, some marks that might show that. So I'm just doing these kind of jaggedy lines here like this. You might have in fact this morning loads of different people did lots of different things to achieve that effect like this. All right,
Me, sorry to bother you.
that's all right. Yeah.
Could I just have the password, because I was a late sign up? Can I just have the password?
Oh yeah, it's draw 22.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think with a capital D, I think. I can check it if it doesn't work for you though. All right. Okay.
It's capital D, Jamie.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. So so there's two things to start off with, and then when you finish that, the next task is to start drawing a different bird and applying some of those techniques that you've learnt today to that bird. But see how you get on, because most people this morning spent the whole lesson working on these pictures, which is perfectly acceptable, and you can take your time over it, because we're going to keep doing something quite similar next week. But obviously I said as well that we'll perhaps try some biro. So I started doing that this morning. And so there's the beginning of it here. In fact, some people did move into biro as well already. So if you wanted to, if you thought, oh, I'm too impatient, I want to do biro as well, then, and you can see here all the things I've been talking about with putting marks in. You'll see that the bird's head is actually quite smooth and soft looking. And I've used much more expressive marks on there because that was the kind of mood I was in. And also I like the movement that comes forward in that kind of loose mark making style. Okay, and then as I said, we'll try perhaps adding some watercolors to it as well later. So just discussing here some of the different things that we're going to be focusing on, showing people showing everyone the worksheet. The idea of this exercise really is to bring texture and mark making, as I said, into your work, but to experiment and have as much fun as possible, and hopefully just loosening up a bit, which is why I supplied the worksheet in the first place. But of course you can get stuck into your own bird as well. Okay, so during this session I tend to skip between the different pictures that are doing, but I felt it was important to do a little bit of work on the owl using some of the techniques. My sort of approach to it is quite rapid and quite loose, and it's nice to just occasionally refer to some of the techniques around the edge of the worksheet, so that you can say, oh, I'll just try a bit of that, I'll layer a bit of that. I've got my own kind of way of putting marks down, but having that little bit of suggestion in the background just allows you to sort of think, oh, well, what would happen if I tried this or that on my idea as well. So I had a lot of fun sort of playing around with the different techniques. So you can, and the important thing about this is that you're adding a little bit of character into the image as well. We're not just looking for a photographic or a reproduction of the picture. We're looking for something that's expressive, has a little bit of energy in it, and is exciting to do. and allows you to kind of loosen up a little bit as you work, to get your creative juices flowing, I suppose, which is what we're doing here today. It's a really nice exercise for the opening of our 10 weeks. So over here, I did a little bit of work on the flying owl. I didn't quite finish off the wings and stuff, but I do put some more mark making, as you can see over here. One of the things I enjoyed particularly was doing the motion sort of lines in the background. One thing you could try doing is using the side of your pencil and hold the pencil not above your hand but underneath your hand, and I do sort of do a little bit of that later on. So rather than holding it as I'm holding it here, you actually put the top of the pencil underneath your hand, and that sort of changes the angle of the graphite on the surface, and just allows you to sort of perhaps maybe twist the pencil as you're moving it to get thinner or thicker lines or more jagged edges, for that expressive sort of look that we're going for in some of these images. So as I said, I hop between the different pictures as we talk about it this lesson. When people asked a couple of questions about what we're doing, but then we go back into the owl as well. So if you haven't got the worksheets, it's very easy to find sheets of mark making on the internet. If you type mark making or cross hatching techniques, you'll get loads and loads of different sheets with lots of fantastic examples of mark making. In fact, there's just loads of them. The ones that I chose on the worksheet here were just a few examples, but you can actually collect them all off the internet and perhaps even make your own booklet full of them to refer to if you wanted to. But in this picture, I'm now working on, we realized it was I think it was a red wing bird. For some reason my camera kept going off. I think it was the battery. There we go. So here we just talked a little bit about the marks in the background, I think. There we go, back to the bird. So I spent quite a lot of time, most of the lesson, working on this biro, and we're going to do a bit more biro work next week. But you'll find that biro is a fantastic material or pen to use for drawing. The nice thing about biro is that you can get very subtle marks. You can get very, very, very pale marks. You can make it as smooth as you could have done with a pencil, or you can be as expressive and scribbly, if you like, with a biro pen as well. I just really like using a biro quite spontaneously, if you like. In this case, what I did earlier in the day in the lessons with live lessons was that I sketched out the main shapes of the bird before then working back in with the details and correcting shapes as I went. Here you can see me using the pencil underneath my hand to do the expressive marks before going back to the biro again. So it's quite therapeutic as well using a biro. Once you get in, or just drawing generally, once you get in the kind of flow of drawing, it's wonderful. You kind of have this little bit of escape away from everything that you're doing or thinking about, and you can get absorbed in it. I particularly like to listen to audiobooks and things while I'm doing this, or just music. So as I said before, I'm just correcting shapes or adding in little bits of detail which I hadn't seen before as I go back. So constantly looking at the photo or the illustration that I'm working from, and then going back to the drawing And the other thing to remember is that I'm adding my own ideas and marks into this as well, but looking particularly as well at the tonal range within the picture as well. So in order to get good contrast between those black feathers, the grey feathers and the red feathers in here. So for example, just behind the neck on the back, I suppose, of the bird, you can, once you put in some marks, you can then do like a very light hatch perhaps over the vast majority of the area, to give it a slightly darker tone to another area of the bird. So building up layers of mark making and tone, even with a biro pen, is a great way to sort of bring varying amounts of mid-tones, dark, and then lighter areas as well. So you can see me here mapping out the shape of the curves in some of the feathers and just working out generally where the smaller shapes will go. So remember that, you know, if you're doing a drawing, it's a great idea to start in pencil, because pencil doesn't feel so permanent, and you can do it very lightly as well, and you can correct things really easily right from the beginning. So it's a nice idea to start off quite loosely with drawing the main shapes and outlines of anything really, including these birds, and then checking off the proportions as well. So making sure that the tail feather is in proportion with the body and the head and so forth. So, and this is something that you constantly do whilst making a drawing, is make corrections to shapes and even the patterns inside. So you start with the big shapes and then move into the slightly smaller shapes, and then finally, of course, moving into the smaller shapes and the details as well. And then you can start adding the tone and the textures that we've been talking about with the owls earlier. Anyway, I hope you've really enjoyed today's lesson, and I hope to see you again next week. Don't forget you can subscribe and watch loads of my other videos as well.